So we'll talk today a little bit about how, populations of animals, organisms, plants can change over time. We did a few experiments in the past days to demonstrate that too. And we'll talk more about that today. So you can look at, for example, a moth. You can see two different colors. Do you see the two moths on the tree? So which one do you think has an advantage in this environment? The lighter one has an advantage. And why would it be better to be that lighter color moth than the darker color moth? That's right. So it's hard to see the light color moth. And so animals that might eat the moth might miss it. But the ones that would be eaten more commonly would be the ones that are dark. So in this environment, the moths that are dark would probably die out. And that's what happens. And then the ones that are light are the ones that do survive and reproduce and have offspring. And so you would see the population of moths keep on increasing in the light color, and the ones that are dark would die out in this area. But there are other places, like in the cities, not so common now as it used to be, but cities used to have a lot of pollution. We have a lot of a black ash. And so the moths would do better that were dark in the cities and blend in with the black on the bricks and on the streets, where there's a lot of smoke and pollution.
Is the title natural selection for this?
Yes. So natural selection, basically it's talking about nature selecting a trait. Basically you'd say that it's selecting this light color moth in this environment. But the ones that have light color are selected for, which means that they're going to be the ones that will survive and pass on the trait to their offspring. So this trait is selected by nature, and that's the one that's advantageous to this population. So when they say natural selection, that's what they mean. They mean a certain trait that has an advantage, which is then selected for by nature and passed on to the children. We can see this in, extreme cases sometimes, say peacocks, for example. Over the years, they've grown to have very, very large feathers. So what do you think would be an advantage to having feathers like this for a peacock? Scare away predators, right? And why especially would this be scary for predators? That's right. So you'll see a lot of insects, you're going to see eye shapes. And so butterflies, peacocks, other animals, you might see eye designs on them. And the idea is to make it look like to a predator that these are large animals, because if the eyes are this big, this is talking about, pretty big animal, and so they're going to shy away from this if they see just this area, not the peacock itself. So it's for protection. Why else might you see this? That's right. So now, is this a male or female bird? Male, right? Males are colorful. So the birds, you see colorful male birds. What colors are female birds? Brown. So, and why would they need to be brown? What about brown would be important, Elizabeth? That's right. Because, mother birds are by their nest. They're on the eggs. They're keeping them warm. And some other birds just blend in with their nest and with the tree. And so female birds are brown, gray. Male birds are colorful. And so male birds have a mating call. Male birds are the ones that sing. Male birds are the ones that, they sing, they dance to try to get a female bird's attention. And so the more colorful birds, the more beautiful birds are the ones that will probably have more female birds and then pass on offspring. And so the ones that are chosen for by female birds are the ones that are more colorful, that are larger, that are more beautiful.
The birds of paradise, so they're usually really colorful, but doesn't it make them more noticeable by flight?
That is true. So that is definitely something that would be a trade-off. However, they would be in an environment where they either would not have many predators or they're quite quick and they're able to just fly away really quickly. So that's why they had to counteract that colorfulness by other things, which would be they're in an environment without many predators, or they're just able to escape very easily. They're just quick enough that they can do that. And so we do see over time, not just in birds, but in other animal groups, they are bred partly for beauty. That they are chosen based on characteristics that make them more beautiful. And so we do see over time populations of animals, they get prettier, more colorful based on because they were chosen.
Do peacocks fly?
Not very well. No, they don't really fly. Kind of like turkeys or chickens, or they can kind of glide just a little bit, but they're mostly just walking around. They don't really fly. No. Yeah, and so they're pretty vulnerable to being attacked because they can't really. I mean, they can run. That's about it. So we had about adaptation yesterday in the worksheet. So an animal might want a certain trait, but it doesn't mean it's going to get that trait. So a beaver might want to have a chainsaw-like structure to chop down trees, but just because it wants it doesn't mean it's going to get it. So, there are certain traits that you might get within genes that are passed on, but animals can't get them just because they want that trait. So you don't see this in nature where they get what they want or what they need. Now, what would happen though is a beaver could get sharper teeth. They could get bigger teeth. And so that lets them cut down trees faster and better. Or they might get a bigger tail, things like that. But they have to work with what they've been given. You don't get things like, a chainsaw, which they never had to begin with. Nature works with what they've already been given in the genes.
Are you copying anything down or you're just taking from?
I mean, you can just, there's not much to say right now, but you can make notes if you want to about what we're talking about, but there isn't much to write down right now. We'll skip this for now. Galapagos, actually, no, what, really fast. Galapagos Islands. Have you ever been there before? It's really beautiful. It's in South America. Well, it's an island off South America, off Ecuador, right here. It's right around the equator. And there's a chain of several islands. Some of them right here in this picture. And they're famous for the turtles, or tortoises. They can get quite big and they can live for a very long time, well over 100 years. But the babies are really, really small. So it's amazing how much they grow within that time period. Other things you see in the islands are, colorful iguana, Sally Lightfoot crab. And so you can see just very, very bright colors in these animals. Darwin went there, and that was where he got his idea about animals changing over time. And what he noticed is that there were different beaks of birds on different islands. He looked from island to island, and what he saw is that these are all finches. These are all the same kind of bird. They were all finches, but the beaks were different from island to island. And he was wondering why that happened. How could you have one kind of bird, a finch, have different beaks? And he realizes that it was the food on the islands that made them look different. So woodpecker finch, right here. And so that would be a place with lots of wooded trees. You would have other birds that would just eat small insects. And so you have ones like here with sharp, small beaks that could be on the ground digging up small insects. Others would have larger beaks that would crack nuts, like this one, for example. And he realized that based on the food that was available to them, the beaks were different because the ones that didn't have a good beak just would die. They wouldn't be able to eat food. But the ones that had a beak that was suited for the environment could survive and pass on the trait to their offspring. And so that's where the idea started. Oh, wait, so is the Zoom link not working? Because Ben Nelson just, oh, that's why I didn't see it. I guess I can't see who wants to come in if I'm doing the slideshow. All right. Okay. Sorry, let me get back to this really fast. So many things to do and think about. Okay, view slideshow. Another example of that would be a wolf. At one time, all you had was just a wolf. You didn't have different kinds of dogs. But people captured wolves, they captured the tamest wolves. And over time, as you capture the tamest of the wolves and bred the tamest of the wolves, you eventually were able to get wolves that you could domesticate, that you could have as pets. And from that, you then have different dog breeds. If you wanted to get a small dog, you would just keep on breeding the smallest dogs in the litter. Every time you had new dogs born, you would just choose the smallest ones each time to breed. And as you did that, you would get traits that you wanted. This happened for centuries. People would do this. But all these right here, all the same species, they're all descended from one thing. They're all the same. Wolves and dogs, even today, are still the same species. They're different kinds of breeds, but they're still the same species. They look very different based on their coats and how big they are, but they're all basically wolves. Yes.
Where is
Asiatics. Wait, where are you seeing that one? Oh, right here. Ancient Asiatics.
Is that a breed because it's not?
Yeah, that one I believe is just, so basically, I haven't done much research on this one, but it looks like what there is that this one is its own. It's not from Europe. This one probably, I would guess, to be from Asia. That, that some were bred in Europe, some are bred in Asia. And I think that's what they mean, but I can check really fast. But I believe that's what they mean, is that these are wolves that were captured in Asia and were bred over time. Europeans by far are the ones that did this the most. You see a wide variety of breeds because of that. But I think the Asians also. Yeah, it's just, and these are very old dog breeds. The Chow Chow, Afghan Hound. So these are just ones that were bred over in Asia. Fruit and vegetables also have changed over time. And so the top picture shows you a painting of watermelon as it was about 500 years ago. Well, 400 years ago. And you can see that most of this was just this pulp, which you can't really eat. There wasn't much edible part to the watermelon, just a little bit of the pink. But we bred watermelon over time to have only the pulp, the white part they don't eat on the outside. And that the majority of the watermelon is edible, red stuff. What would this be, do you think? Somebody says a pear, somebody said, what is it? Avocado, lime, banana. It's a banana. So the seeds at one time were very large. These are the seeds in the banana. Now they're very, very small in the center. And so we bred them over time, and they were hard too. They're like rocks. The seeds were hard. So we bred them to be small seeded bananas, to be longer. This is kind of, this is not the same as banana as far as shape goes. It's not very long. So we made them longer and slender. We made a peelable cover. This was a tough cover, but how they breed it, just over time, every plant they got that had smaller seeds, they kept on breeding the smaller seed plants together. And they would just always choose the seeds that were the smallest ones to breed. And it took a long time. This is not overnight. This would be decades and centuries of doing this. But over decades and centuries, they're able to breed these different fruits and vegetables. So it tastes a lot better now, more nutrients.
So that looks like it's like a recent picture.
Yeah, I think it was, I don't remember how they did these ones. Because it's not what we have nowadays for banana. I don't know if they just took maybe this exists in certain places, that you still have the older generation of bananas. I'm not for sure though. That's a good question as far as how do we have a recent picture of this. But my guess would be that you do have some types that were in the wild that were as they were centuries ago. And we have some of the newer ones that were bred with farmers. Yeah, I think that would be my guess, not for sure. Because this clearly is a picture of a recent plant. Or they just went in the laboratory and genetically modified this where they made it look like how it was. They could have also done that too. And this one right here, what vegetable is this? This is a vegetable. So this is a carrot. So one time that's what a carrot looked like. but this is what 10th century Persia and Asia minor, that's what you would have seen as a carrot. Because carrots are roots. Yeah, it's in the soil. So you're eating the root of a plant. But they bred it to have orange carotene, to be a lot larger, better tasting, more nutritious. Green beans, that's a good guess.
Sweet.
Celery, wheat, that's a good guess too. Looks like wheat.
It's
Green onions, yeah. Lettuce, peas,
Oh, peas.
asparagus.
What is that? Peas or green?
It's corn.
Oh.
So this is a very old picture of a corn. 7000 BC is when it was first domesticated. At that time, the kernels were very, very hard. It was like popcorn kernels that we have nowadays. You got to use a hammer to crack open the shells, and it's barely edible. But nowadays, we bred corn to be 1,000 times larger in size, and the seeds to be 1,000 times larger in size. They made this peelable outer covering right here, and so we bred it to be peelable, and a lot more sugar and a lot tastier, and more nutrients. What about this one?
A cherry.
Looks like a cherry, right?
It's a radish.
Radish, apple,
It's gotta be an apple. It's
a what?
an apple.
An apple?
I feel like you want tomato.
Apricot?
Oh,
It's a peach. So the stone in the middle of the peach, you have the hard area, you have the hard thing. It's called the stone. Yeah, or the pit. I mean, and so this is about 4000 BC. Oh, sorry. When the Chinese started to domesticate the peach. At the time, it did not taste sweet. It was like a lentil bean taste to it. So really, it was more of a bean tasting than a fruit tasting. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how they got that name. But you see how it's changed so much over time. It's a lot larger. At the time, you only had about 64% was edible. The rest was just largely 36% was just the stone, the part you can't eat. And so it was like a somewhat sweet, but mostly a sour and salty taste, not much of a sweet taste at the time. But now they've made the flesh part that you can eat a lot larger in size. Even the skin is edible now, and only 10% is a stone, which you can't eat. The rest is edible. So much larger, 64 times larger in size, very sweet taste, very much more nutritious than they used to be.
So if they started domesticating it in like 4000 BC, how do people still know what it was like?
I guess it's more of extrapolation, and also writings. People would write down things, that they would describe the taste of certain foods, and based on the descriptions or paintings of fruits or vegetables, we can know what they were like back then.
But then,
So-
like, because corn was in North America, it wasn't in
Mm-hmm.
anywhere else, and the people didn't really write anything, so I didn't know what it was like.
Well, corn in America came a lot later because the corn that I was showing you on here, 7000 BC. So that was a long time ago when it started looking like that. But but since then, even like 300 or 400 years ago, it's still very much like we see today. It hasn't changed a whole lot with it. I mean, it's somewhat, but it hasn't changed a whole lot over centuries of time. It's been pretty constant for a while. Others are new, have changed new in like watermelon, for example. You can see that looked pretty different even 400, 300 years ago. But corn is a pretty old food, and that has been more like we see nowadays, like this, for a very long time. Yes.
I have a question. Where did you get those pictures? Like, how do you know that that's like accurate?
Well, and that's the same question I think Elizabeth had too, like we had or Lucy and the Peelers had too. It's I think a combination of different things. Like some of it is based on the writings or pictures. Like for example, like the watermelon one, that's from a painting somebody did. So we can look at paintings or drawings people had at that time. People would write about how things would taste or look, and so based on the writings, we would know that. Part of it too, I think, would be guesswork and just guessing. But most of it, I think, would be based on pictures that people would draw and make paintings. That would be the primary way we would know.
And so like in 100, like in, I don't know, 10,000 years or whatever, how are the fruits gonna be like, vegetables gonna be bigger and like tastier?
They might be, yeah. I mean, it's definitely, as we've seen over time, I mean, you went from, this to this in a peach. So certainly, I'm sure that, you can see like avocados, they make huge avocados. Have you ever seen this before? They're like watermelon size, where you can just, you can buy really big ones, you can make a whole bunch of guacamole, for example. I mean, so they do breed even nowadays, larger and larger fruits or vegetables for certain reasons. So. Let's see. How much time do we have left? It's not time. Okay. So let's talk about this for today. So let's start on this slide. Have you ever been here before?
Yeah, that's good.
Grand Canyon. So it's gorgeous. Now, what do you notice about it? You can see there's different strata. There's different rock layers. And so scientists aren't actually sure how this happened. Somehow, most likely water formed this. Now, whether it was a flood that made this or over time a river just carving it, they're not quite sure, but most scientists think water is the result or what caused this to happen. And so you had water wearing this away. And you can see below the ground all the rock layers that are visible. Yes. So yeah, so there's a river that goes through it. And so some scientists say, well, it was that river working over a very, very long time, slowly wearing it away. Others say, no, it was a great flood, or like a huge flood that made it happen very quickly. They don't really agree on what happened. Nobody really knows for sure. They just know that water caused it. But whether it was really fast in a flood or slowly with the river, they're not sure.
So when you go there, can you drive in those things?
Like drive down the valley?
Yeah. Like,
There's certain places you can go to. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's certain places. I mean, it's not you can go through all the time, but yeah, there are definitely places you can go to there in the valley region that are down there. Yeah.
And then when you go, what do you do?
Well, it depends on what you want to do. I mean, some people just climb up to the top and like just watch the sunrise. There are bridges you can walk across. Like there's like this like glass bridge, like or the see-through bridge you can walk across. You can see the ground below you.
Great.
There's zip lining. There's all sorts of different things you can do. Mountain climbing. It depends on where you want to go.
It's not just like one canyon, it's like a bunch of just like species everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, there are different parts to it. Now there is a part that's really large and wide,
Yeah.
but there are smaller areas too.
Does that mean like the river might have changed course a little bit through the time? Or is it
It may have, yes. Mhm. Yes. So the idea that geologists have about the rock strata is that over time, these rocks built on top of each other. That at one time you had sand, you had loose gravel, but as you have more layers on top, that becomes rock, sedimentary rock. In earth science class, you learn about different kinds of rocks, sedimentary, igneous, metamorphic, and how they're made. So sedimentary rock is formed in layers, where you have at one time, basically it's just loose soil, loose gravel, loose sand. But as they get compact, they turn into rock. And so the very bottom layers are the oldest, the top layers are the newest. So if you dig into the ground and you find fossils down here, geologists assume that these are older animals than ones that you find up in this area. Based on the layers, they say that these are older than these ones. So they look in different places of the world and they find a fossil in this layer, then they would say, well, that's going to be this time period. And all of the fossils they find in that time period, they would put in this same place. So we can look at strata in different areas of the world and find the same kinds of animals. Like you can see right here, shellfish in this strata. And you can go up to higher strata, you can see fish. And so the idea is that you see this progression over time. And this would be an example of what you see in different strata that you can see in the oldest ones, these little beetle looking things called trilobites. These are some of the oldest fossils that we have. As you go higher and higher, you can see aquatic animals in these layers. These are just, every color band is a different layer of strata. You see eventually more complex creatures like dinosaurs and then mammals. And so based on that, some scientists say, well, this shows evolution exists. And some scientists say that we can see simple to complex animals. So that was for a long time, that was the prevailing mindset. But there's a few problems with that too. One problem would be, okay, if that is the case, let's just say that all we had was just beetles in the world at this time. And then we move on to more aquatic animals, and then we move on to more complex animals. How do we know for sure that this is the oldest layer down here, and that these are newer layers? We're going with an assumption that's the case. And there are problems with that assumption, as we're going to talk about. Jordan, a minute? So we'll talk about that, problems with that assumption, but you have to assume for this to be valid that the rock layers build very slowly over a very long period of time, millions of years. Because for evolution to work, you need millions and millions and millions, really billions of years would be ideal, but you need millions of years for animals to change dramatically over time. And if you're only dealing with, like, say, a few million years between these layers, not enough time for you to see a wide range of differences in animals. There was a scientist, Charles Doolittle Walcott, who made a tremendous discovery up in British Columbia in Canada. It's called the Burgess Shale. And you can see, especially a bunch of shale. Shale is just a flat slate-like rock, but it has a lot of fossils in this area. And he stumbled onto these trilobite fossils. It looks like that. No, it's just a recreation. This is just a recreation of it. They're not alive nowadays. They're very ancient animals. They're extinct. Yeah. They can get kind of big. I mean, yeah, like animals back then were a lot larger. I mean, yes. As what? Oh, confusing animal. Yeah, I think so. I think that is a really good point. I never thought of it before. But yeah, the animal thinks that's the head when it's really not. Yeah. Right. So there were some pretty bizarre animals, back in, this about 5 million years ago or so. Opabinia, this animal lived in the sea and had this really, really strange proboscis, which is this kind of like, like an elephant's trunk, but it had this claw-like thing on it that would capture prey. It had all these eyes, several eyes on it. Yes.
How do they know it went in the water?
Oh, well, most animals that are fossilized are from the water. For things to be fossilized, you need to have things buried very quickly. And so it can be buried in the water, under the soil. But most animals would be fossilized in the water just based on that. So that would be one way they can tell. They can also tell based on their skin. Yes.
Do you think this would be like a seafloor because it has eyes on top? And it could be like a seafloor looking up for predators.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. To be close to the seafloor, you can see right here. So there wouldn't be predators below it, but all predators would be above it. That's right.
How do they know, like, the shape of it?
The shape, well, you can see right here, this fossil right here. I mean, basically they use this to recreate it.
But where did they get that?
The fossil? Oh, this is Charles Walcott. So he had this discovery. And so he saw these in the Burgess Shale.
So what if, like, how the Bible talks about the Great Flood?
Mhm.
Well, like, what if during the flood, all the mud on the bottom of the sea just got disrupted?
Yeah,
And so all the different strata layers were rearranged.
that's right. So that is definitely a possibility. So that's one problem that there is with that mindset, that we know layer by layer which ones are oldest and youngest, because that is definitely true. And so there are two different schools of thought about the rock layers. One school of thought is uniformitarian viewpoint, which says that the world never had any great changes. It was just slowly, gradually changing over millions of years. There was no great disruptions in this rock strata. But that's one assumption. The other assumption would be that there were catastrophes. that shaped the world very quickly and very dramatically. And so that would be an example of catastrophism, where we had this worldwide flood that could have disrupted all the rock strata to the point where all the fossils got rearranged and we really don't see ages, and we don't see it separated by age. So that is definitely a possibility. We can't say for sure which view is correct. We can't say for sure what the flood did to the rock strata and how much it did change it. We can only make guesses about that. But that definitely is a possibility that we're working with is not an accurate historical representation of how the animals changed over time. We'll talk more about the difficulties with that. With that is definitely a good thing to bring up, that we really can't be confident in the rock strata at all. And that's one reason why we can't be. Yes.
How big was that? The other one?
Opabenia?
Yeah.
I forget now. It was not huge. I think it was about 2 feet or so long at most. I think 1 to 2 feet. It wasn't enormous. Comb jelly. So this is an ancient animal. But what's cool about this one is that we still see them to this day. And so this is an ancient animal that we actually still do have living. And they're really cool because they're clear, but the light hits them in such a way that they refract. They look like they're rainbow. So you can see they shimmer, and you have this rainbow. And you don't see it too well in this picture, but I can show you a video of this later. But you can see that just this iridescent, shimmering rainbow all over their fins.
That makes them look like more liable to predators.
It would be, although I think they're just able to stay on the surface, which they're not going to have many predators. And they're able to, I think, swim fairly quickly. But you're right. I mean, there always is a trade-off when you are shiny and colorful to having predators find you.
Wasn't like the cockroach also like really old like that, or was it not?
The cockroach,
Isn't that
I would imagine is pretty old. Yeah, I'm not for sure about
aren't,
that
like,
one.
turtles the same way?
Are they what?
Aren't like turtles the same way? Or-
That sounds right to me too. I'm not for sure, but I would imagine so. Yeah.
Aren't dragonflies also really old as well?
Yeah, they are dragonflies. I know that. Yeah. So there are lots of animals that we have seen for maybe millions of years here in the world. Most though have changed dramatically over time, but there are a few of them that have not. And comb jelly would be one example of one that has not changed much over time. Jordan, you have a question?
So those are still living?
They are. Yeah. And so so this would be one example of, well, maybe things aren't as old as we think. Maybe if this is still around to this day, maybe these fossils are not as old because they think they're about 5 million year old fossils. Well, if we still have this animal existing as it is, and it really has not changed at all from here to now, maybe the fossils that we're seeing are not as old as scientists think they are. Yes.
But aren't there ways to test like how the age, especially with something that's like was like living like carbon? Or, you know,
Yeah, so that's a good point. So you have carbon dating, for example. Now, carbon dating is only really accurate at most 1,000 years. Yeah, you can do up to 5,000 years, but it really falls apart pretty quickly as far as accuracy goes after about 1,000 years. So carbon dating would be good for things that are relatively recent, but things that are millions of years old, like this one is supposed to be, carbon dating could not work. You wouldn't. Yeah, but there are other things you can do besides carbon dating. There are other. You can look at iodine, for example. You can look at phosphorus, potassium. So there are a lot of other elements you can look at, and that's what scientists will do. But you're still basing this assumption that the world has not changed dramatically in the past millions of years. If you think the world is millions of years old, which is still up for debate too amongst scientists, you're going with the assumption that the world has not undergone dramatic catastrophic events that would change those elements, that would change how they're arranged. And we can't say for certain that did or didn't happen. And so, yeah, scientists do use things like carbon dating, but they definitely are not bulletproof. They are also flawed, especially when you get to very, very old things, because you have a greater chance of there being some kind of change along those millions of years where it might give you wrong results. But scientists do use those to try to see how old things are. So shows you better pictures of what the comb jelly looks like. And it's light hitting in different ways that creates this. Now, jellyfish also do glow in the dark. And so this one right here is glow in the dark, the red one right here. So they do have different bioluminescent pigments.
What's in duct tape?
Duct tape, how much do you need?
Like a little bit. I just have the duct tape in my folder.
Oh, just a little bit. Yeah, it's the bottom drawer. Make sure you bring it back. So jellyfish can glow blue, red, green in the dark, yellow. But these right here that you're seeing, these ones are also just by the light hitting it during the day. So it was a very strange world. These were very strange animals that existed at one time. They don't exist anymore.
Do they sting?
Oh, the jellyfish? The comb jelly? I don't know if they do or not. I don't think the comb jelly, not humans. I think they sting other. I don't think the comb jelly do. I know a lot of jellyfish do sting humans, but the comb jelly, I'm not for sure.
So you could just like have that as a pretty flash.
Yeah, I bet they're expensive. I'm not for sure their cost, but you could. Yeah, for sure. You definitely could. I just think that they're probably not cheap. Probably why you don't see them very often. Yeah.
The bottom one on the way bottom, that's horseshoe crab.
A horseshoe crab in the very bottom.
And the bottom picture, I think at the very bottom, those,
These?
yeah.
These are actually trilobites. Yeah. Yeah, they look very similar. So you see trilobites in here, Opabinia right here. Other animals like this one right here kind of look like this plant-like thing, but it actually was an animal.
Barnacles or names?
Barnacles.
Ancient barnacles or something.
Oh, like these right here.
Yeah.
I mean, they look similar to barnacles in some ways. So they might be related to barnacles, but I'm not for sure about that. See jellyfish. So animals definitely have changed a lot over time. Now, what's hard for evolutionists to explain is this. So you see in the rock layers nothing for what scientists would say millions of years. And all of a sudden, within this short period, you see all this variety of life. All of this right here, just suddenly out of nowhere, you see in the rock layers. And so for evolutionists, this is really hard to explain because evolution is based on the assumption that animals change very slowly over a very long period of time. So for evolution to be correct, what you would expect would be from oldest layers upward, just a very, very gradual progression of complexity. But what you would not expect would to see nothing and then all of a sudden everything all at once. And that's really what you see in the rock layers. Yes.
How do you know that some of those animals aren't like that they're extinct if we've only explored 5%?
Yeah, we can't say for sure. That is definitely true. And there are definitely some animals that we thought were extinct, like the coelacanth, which they thought was extinct, but then it's not. And so it definitely is a possibility. The woolly mammoth still is around. Dodo bird might still be around somewhere. Right? That is a possibility. Now, is it a great possibility? Probably not, but it is a possibility because there definitely are things we have not explored yet through the world. So yeah, extinction is really, it's a theory which says that, we believe this animal is gone, but yeah, I mean, we definitely might find them somewhere in the world because we haven't seen every part of the world yet. That's definitely true. Now, scientists, so evolutionists, the idea behind evolution is that you have one kind of creature that then descends and breaks off into different kinds of groups. Like the idea is that, this would be a cross between a bird and a reptile. And that's what this is showing. So what evolution want to find would be these hybrids that show how birds and reptiles are related and how over time, this creature right here could have given rise to birds and reptiles. And so they look for fossils that are hybrids between different animal groups. So the Archaeopteryx is the best example for evolutionists between these hybrid animal groups, where you do see reptile and bird-like features in this fossil. So it'd be hard to see in this fossil, but you can see this is a representation of what it might have looked like at the time. And so what do you see? Teeth. Well, that's unusual because birds don't have teeth. Not usually anyway. Birds usually just have a beak without teeth. Reptiles have teeth though. But you do see wings and feathers and talons like a bird has. But it definitely has these reptilian-like features too. And so the idea is that it's a cross between a reptile and a bird, which then eventually gave rise to birds and reptiles in different groups.
So that creature looks really like, you know, in fairy books, in fairy tale books, you see like the creatures and only that it has the human head. It looks a lot like that.
Might be based off those fossils, possibly. I mean, really, when they just basically combine animal groups, right? And so I'm sure in that book, that's what they're doing, is just combining bird features, human features, reptilian features. And that's probably all they were doing. Like a crossing a dragon and a bird, I bet is what they're. They didn't exist. No, humans never saw these. Now they could have found fossils though, but they wouldn't have seen these. What's really interesting is that George Washington didn't know about dinosaurs. They had not discovered dinosaurs during his time period. So dinosaurs are a relatively recent discovery. They didn't know about dinosaurs until the last 2 centuries. And so there are animals they had no idea about. And dinosaurs are one of those things because they'd only recently discovered them. But there definitely would be fossils that they could have unearthed. And they said, well, based on these fossils, maybe that's how unicorns possibly, the idea of unicorns might have been based on the fossils that they were just not looking at properly. That's one reason why they might have had the idea for unicorns.
So how did they know it had feathers?
So sometimes in the fossil, I don't know if you can see in this picture or not, you can kind of see a feather outline, and not that well, but based on the impressions on here, they would make a guess that there were feathers based on the other impressions that were lighter, definitely not as heavy as the bone impressions. That would help them understand, well, this must have had feathers based on that.
Wait, so is that the skeleton of that?
Yeah, exactly.
And wait, so that is actually like a thing?
Yeah, it existed. Yeah, we found these are fossil. These are real fossils. So yeah. This is a long time ago, millions of years ago. So it wasn't when humans were around, but this is a prehistoric animal. So an evolutionist you can see how big it is compared to a human. When you ask evolutionists, well, where is your proof for evolution? Where is the proof that animals have changed dramatically over time to different kinds of animal groups? They point to this fossil. This is always the first thing I point to when they give the proof for evolution. And so you definitely do see this hybrid between a bird and a reptile, but it's mostly bird. I mean, if you look at it, there's not much about it that's reptilian. I mean, you do have the teeth on it, right? That's the biggest feature on it that makes it look more reptilian than bird-like. But besides that, it's very much like a bird. And so it's not really a great hybrid mix between those two animal groups. And that's the best mix. That's their best example of what are called missing links, intermediate links between animal groups. And so one thing that Charles Darwin realized about this, he looked at the Cambrian layers and he saw, like I said, this explosion of life. And he was troubled by this because, Charles Darwin, father of evolution, he believed that animals change slowly over time. He needed them to change very slowly over millions and millions of years for his theory to be correct. And he knew that the fossils were not telling him that. And he admitted that. And he said that in this rock layer, we are seeing animals appear suddenly. And he couldn't explain that. And he knew he couldn't explain it. He needed more data. And he said this, difficulty understanding the absence of vast piles of fossiliferous strata. And so what is he saying at that point? He says that we need these animals over time in the rock strata progressing from very simple to complex, very slowly, with all these intermediate links between them. And what he's saying is that we don't see that. We see nothing in the rock layers, and then all of a sudden all different kinds of species. And that's what he's saying right here. There's the absence of these missing links between fossils before the Cambrian layer. He can give no satisfactory answer for the lack of fossils prior to the Cambrian layer. And so he had this hope that they could still find those fossils, that if he looked long enough, he would eventually find those fossils in those lower layers. But nowadays, we can be pretty confident that we've looked really anywhere we can for these fossils. And we've had about 200 years of evolutionary theory and understanding this idea. We had not found them yet. So tomorrow we'll talk more about this. There's no homework tonight.